Hello, and welcome to Agents of Nonprofit. My name is Alexander Lapa, and I'm here to speak with everyday superheroes helping nonprofits. Joining me today is Holly Rustick to talk about grant writing. Holly, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Alex, for having me on the show. I'm really excited to be here.
So I'm curious if you could please share your superhero origin story.
Ooh, the origin story. I always love that. Okay, so if y'all don't know me, my name once again, Holly Rustick, and I'm with grant writing and funding. I teach people how to write grants, y'all. I teach people how to open up freelance grant writing businesses, replace their full-time income on flexible hours, working from home by writing grants. And how I really got into this was, of course, I started writing grants 20 years ago. So I've been in this space for 2 decades. And like many grant writers, almost every single one of them I know, I fell into it. I was doing it and I didn't even know what it was. So let me give you the story. Okay, so we rewind time back in 2004, right at the end of 2004, big tragedy, and that was the Asian tsunami. So I don't know if you recall that, but it shook the world. Huge tsunami across Indonesia, even Thailand, Sri Lanka. Like there was a lot of different places that it hit. The most devastating tsunami like in our current modern history, right? And so right after that, there was some opportunities then to go and to help. So I wanted to go. I was working in Kuwait at the time as a teacher, and I saw some opportunities for community development that came up later in 2005 or like in early 2005 after the tsunami. And I went down to Indonesia. So I went and I got a contract. I was working there in community development, and we were really like on the ground doing some after school programs. Like all the students that we were working with they lost their houses and they were living in tents, like all kind of smushed together. So we were doing this after school program and offering a lot of different things, sports, art, etc. And what I found was as I started talking and learning the language and being with people in the community and taking martial arts, like it was such a beautiful, beautiful community after everything they've been through, right? Some of the most amazing people I've ever met. And what they said was, we were a very small startup nonprofit that I was working for. But then we had agencies like the United Nations and all of these huge, like bigger nonprofits that came in and agencies. And this part of Indonesia I was working in specifically had been closed off to the West for about 50 years. So this was the first time it had opened to the West as well. And there was a lot here that, the UN, they're still driving around with like armored cars, with guns, like all of the things, right? Where we were like riding our bikes. We were riding our bikes. So we're like, hey, here we're at work, very embedded in the community. And, so what happened was a lot of the community members would start talking to me and they'd be like, hey, I remember this one lady, she was my martial arts instructor as well. And she said, she had like a cart that sold water and gum and chips and stuff like that before. And she was an entrepreneur. That was part of what she brought in her money. She said, the tsunami wiped all of my supply away, everything. Like I literally just need X amount of money, like not a whole lot in our Western thought, right? But she's like, I don't know how to ask these large organizations because there was like, physically, you could hear the separation, like armored cars, they had machine gun drivers, like all the things. And, she was like, I don't even know how to approach it, but I've heard they have some funding, but I don't know what to do. So I was like, oh, cool. Like I can go, I'll go to the meetings. I'll go find out what's going on and where that money is and all the things. Right. So I started to write grants. I didn't even realize what I was doing just because I was like, let me be the liaison because I can like go in between these worlds right now, right? So let me help you out. And that was the start of my grant writing, of helping, my martial arts instructor in Indonesia get money for her water cart, right? And to restart her business. And so cool. I was like, this is really fun to connect money to mission because I see there is a disconnect. Sometimes there are these wide, these gaps, right? Especially marginalized communities cannot get over these huge gaps that seem to exist with all the people who are holding the money, right? So after that contract ended, I went outside of DC and I actually took a job at a grant writing agency. And back in the day, that was actually pretty novel and new, right? They didn't have any clients in their small community, but worked with people all over the world. And I was like, that is really, really cool. So I worked with them and actually developed like formulaic skills instead of just like, I know, I'm just going to ask for money, right? But like more the formulaic and the research part and the processes. And then after that, I said, hey, this is interesting too, but I want to go back because I really like working abroad. I was like, I want to work abroad again, but I still want to do some of this work for this company. And since I don't actually have to be here physically because none of your clients are, and they're all virtual anyways, I don't even think we called them virtual back then, but whatever, they're all online. Can I just can I just work on the side? And even that, I didn't have the word for freelancer at that time. I was like, can I just work on the side and you just pay me out this way? They're like, cool. Yeah. Like we want to keep you doing the work because, you're good because we trained you well. Thank you. and to keep that going. And I was like, great. So I was able to go to get my master's in Brussels and do freelancing, grant writing on the side. I was able to continue that everywhere I've moved and worked after that. Grant writing has gotten me the job, or I've kept up something on the side. And then in 2014, I quit my full-time job. And at that time I had been working inside a nonprofit again and went full-time into my business. And yeah. There we go. That's my origin story. It's a little long-winded, but very exciting and very international for you.
Well, that's awesome. And I really appreciate that story on many levels because one, I'm obviously helping the community after a tragedy. Two, being one of the early digital nomads, as we call them today.
Yep.
And of course, coaching and helping others follow your lead, which is awesome. So 3 things that we have in common.
Yeah.
What I was thinking we could do in this conversation is kind of divide it into 2. One of them would be from the perspective of the nonprofit, what it's like to have a grant writer on their team. And the other is from the grant writer themselves, because you're one of the few people that have that dual perception or perspective. So I was hoping to start by asking the question, let's just actually even higher than that is, what exactly are the responsibilities of a grant writer? Because I know sometimes they can have multiple responsibilities, multiple hats, but fundamentally, let's just define it together from your perspective. What is a grant writer? What are they supposed to do? What is their value to an organization?
Oh, I love that so much. And you know what I love, even how you position that, Alex, is that you're talking about it as if it's a role by itself and in of itself, and it is. However, a lot of nonprofits, they put the task of grant writing on somebody's plate, but it's not necessarily a primary role. So even the way you just asked that, whoa, like boom, like that's a truth bomb right there. Like, so people like, listen up here, listen up. So, and what I mean by this is a lot of people aren't actually hired as a grant writer. They are hired as a program manager or a case manager or a development director. And grant writing, even an executive director, you guys know what I'm talking about. One of your tasks or sub roles is to write grants. Right. And instead of just saying we need a grant writer. Now, some larger organizations, they do have like that is the title is grant writer, and amazing, right? Amazing. But many of you nonprofits out there listening probably are like, we don't have that big of a staff though, Holly, and we just have to throw this task onto somebody. Okay, I get that. But here's part of that. So now let's get back to the question you actually asked me, Alex. So what is the grant writer? A grant writer in its true form, in of itself as a primary role, is actually more of a grant strategist as well. So I would lean in and say, if you're just having them do the task of grant writing, your grant strategy is probably not there. And that's what you're missing. And that might be why you're not getting many grants and why that person is like, I hate writing grants. And it's just another thing on their list and they're working on the weekends doing it and they're not really getting a lot of traction. You're burning them out. They're not getting a lot of yeses. Because if a primary role of a grant writer is actually to be a strategist. And what I mean by this is to really look like a fundraiser would, or anybody, to look at the organization and say, okay, where are we at? Who are we, right? All of the things like, what is the cause area? And then to really look and say, where do we need to start? So if you're just starting from grants, like that's going to be they're going to be looking at that and set up an entirely different grant strategy than if you are a higher education institution and have been getting millions and millions and millions of dollars in federal grants. Like that's going to be a different strategy, right? And to learn different skill sets as well. So really important to look at that. But overall, we want to build out a strategy, like looking at the year and saying, what grants are out there? What is our priority this year in getting funding? What does that make sense? Are there gaps out there? Does that really lead to our mission? Does that lend into our vision? Does that, all of the things, like we need to first think about that. And then we can say, okay, let's now look for grant prospects because we've really gotten clear on what the priority is. It lends to our mission, all of the things. And then when we have that, we can go ahead and develop a 12-month strategy plan, right? We can start looking at, okay, these grants are going to be coming out at this different time. We want to be prepared for this. We want to make sure we have time and preparation around this. Sometimes grants don't get dropped until 60 days out that they're due, sometimes less than that. So we also just need to know we need to continue to look for grants. We need to kind of see historically maybe when these grants have dropped out in the past so we know about when they may be dropping again so we can prepare for it because it is going to be like, the grant season. So when you have that, then you start writing the grants, right? You look and review the request for proposals or the NOFAs, right? And you actually look through and you say, okay, is this actually a good fit? Like, are we, is it worth our time to actually apply for these? And then you go back to the priority and you start writing the grants. Part of it too is developing relationships with funding sources. So you also want to make sure like, hey, do we know anyone on this board of directors for this foundation that's releasing these grants? Is there a way that we can develop a relationship with them without just asking for a grant for money once a year, right? Are there other ways that we can maybe invite them to fundraisers, invite them to be a part of what we're doing if they're in our community, join a chamber of commerce so we can meet them, like all of the things. That's a really important strategy as well of building relationships. And building relationships could be even like, if it's a federal grant, you're like, but Holly, that's so disconnected. You can still email them in advance and say, hey, we are this nonprofit. We're thinking about applying for this grant. What do you think? Is it a good fit? They're not going to be able to give you all the details, but they're going to be like, okay, yeah, that could work. Here's some information, right? They're going to start seeing your name. So part of it is once strategy, right? A part of it is looking and doing the prospecting work and knowing how to do that, looking at 990s, looking at other places that have gotten funded, making sure it's a good fit. There's like a lot of process that goes into that. Building relationships, writing the grants, and then the last part is managing the grants. So some of grant writers too, part of what they might be doing is also just managing like if you get a first foundation grant, you might have to write a report at the end of the year, keeping up with those kind of things, keeping up with, is this program actually doing what we said it's going to do? Are we getting those results? So there is a lot of parts, and you can see then why this is a role within itself. If you just throw the task of grant writing onto somebody, they're missing out on 4 major things that I talked about, right? I talked about 5 things here. Grant writing was just one of them. They don't have the time and the scope and the training to do all of those things. So a lot of it is going to fall flat. A lot of you might be like, grants just don't work for us. And that's because you did it that way. That's because you threw it on somebody's plate. Or you just hired someone and said, okay, learn how to write grants. And they're like, oh, where do I even start? So, so that, I hope that answered your question. But yes, there is. I love that you actually said, hey, that's a role. And that would be like the ideal role. But I also know that a lot of you are just throwing these tasks on, and that's why it might not be efficient.
You summarized that really, really well. Thank you for that. And you're right. I mean, I imagine, especially if you're a smaller nonprofit, you only see maybe 1 or 2 of those tasks and say, well, I can do this. And like you said, you miss the bigger picture and miss the benefits, and most likely will give up, at least more likely to give up than if you were someone who was dedicated to the entire role. So in that regard, then, like I would imagine, especially if you're a smaller nonprofit, that role you would probably want to assign to someone else who has other roles. You would not necessarily, I'm not going to ask this as a question, but I would imagine you wouldn't have someone dedicated as a role, as a grant writer as a role. Is that typically how it works? Or do you think some nonprofits are like, from the get-go, we need this as an actual person and let's dedicate someone internally for this? Like, are there any pros and cons, or what are the pros and cons of having someone internal versus the next part of my question, which would be external? But if we could focus first on the internal part,
Yeah.
Like, where is a good starting point? What are some things that are good about having a dedicated person internally versus something else in that kind of
Yeah.
perspective? If you could add some comments.
Sure. Yeah, it's such a good question. And to your point, that's where a lot of nonprofits feel like they want to start. We'll talk about how some others operate as well. But a lot of them are like, we can do this internally. Maybe a board member can do it. Maybe a volunteer, an internship program. I would shy away from an executive director doing all this. You might do your first couple of grants, and that's fine. Like, that's just the way it is. But after a while, there's no way to sustain this. There is no way to sustain doing the grant writing because that's really not what an executive director is hired to do, right? They're hired to govern and guide the nonprofit, and they're hired, maybe to manage people, like all of the things. Like, they're really hired to be the face of the organization and so much more. So writing grants is very intensive and it takes a lot of time. So it will take them away from their other roles of actually driving the nonprofit forward. And you're going to see this. You're going to see this. They're going to hit the wall. They're going to burn out, all of the things. And we don't want that, right? We don't want that. So some of them, to your point, like maybe have hired somebody internally, or they just put the task on somebody else's role. Now, here's the thing. If you put the task on somebody else's role, you've got to remove some other task from their role. Okay. Because the thing is like, and so many people come from the nonprofit sector and they say, oh my gosh, it is a toxic place to work because of some of this kind of historical, we'll just keep, everyone wears 50 hats and that's just our culture. I think we're starting to see, especially in this time and age, a shift out of that, right? A shift out of that to say, is that really efficient to be wearing 50 hats? Is it really needed even? Can we find maybe, like I mentioned, the board member? Can a board member just step up and just take on the role of learning how to write grants? And that's what they primarily do. Or we formulate a committee from the board. Like, I feel like the board could really be more involved to help reduce a lot of this toxicity that just kind of is embedded in nonprofits as far as like overworking people. So we could also look at, is there a volunteer internship program that we could bring in to primarily focus on the grants? So then they're not just doing that one task grant writing, but they can start doing some more of those other 5 tasks that I mentioned as well. And but here's the thing, what I see also, even if people are like, okay, I'm on track with that, Holly, I'm good with that. What the gap may be is you don't provide them with the training, though. So if you have a volunteer, board member, intern, or just somebody in your organization that's like, hey, I would love to learn grants. Because if you give them the opportunity, people are going to be like, oh, yes, I will help with that because I want to learn. So even if you're not paying them, listen to this, the volunteer, the board member, all of that, but you're going to pay for the training, people will sign up because people normally realize grants can help me in anything in the world. Like, any sector I've ever been in, I've been able to like stand out from any of the competition, even if they had advanced degrees over me, because I know how to write grants. It is one of the most like interesting kind of competitive edge that you can get that you might not even think about, because there's such an ROI in knowing how to write grants. And a lot of people are like, I don't know how to do that. That's overwhelming and scary for me to even hear the word. Like, so yes, if you can offer training, it's very attractive. So I would say invest in the training as well if you're going to just kind of set that apart on one of your team members or a staff or volunteer, board director, et cetera. So otherwise they're going to just get into it and they're going to be like, I don't know how to do this. They're going to get a lot of no's and they're going to be like, take it internally and be like, I'm not good at this. I'm not really helping the nonprofit, et cetera. You don't want to create that type of culture, right? Like, you want to create it where people feel like excited to be a part of your nonprofit because they feel like they're actually helping. So if you don't give the training, they're not going to feel that way. That's just the reality, because there are going to be a lot of no's. Let's just get that. There are going to be no's, even if you know how to write. But you need to have the training to prepare for that and to write the most competitive grants to have the most advantage in that. So that's the internal side. Does that answer your question, Alex?
Absolutely. And I love the fact that you can compensate them with training, because I think that's totally, like, even in my world, in the Salesforce world, for example, we get certifications. And just the fact that an organization will pay you to get your certification, because there's a dollar amount associated to that, is an incentive. So that's a great
Yeah.
way of not blowing your budgets on grant writing, but still being able to have the people get the proper training to be able to do the job adequately.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we even have in our program, the Freelance Grant Writer Academy, which is mainly geared for freelancers, but we have people that are just in nonprofits join it because inside the program, we teach grant writing and we have unlimited grant reviews. So at our price point, people are like, that's a no brainer. So we have people in there that they're like, we're just sending people from our nonprofit. We're not really interested in the business acumen side, but we are interested in the training side. And because you have unlimited grant reviews, like that's crazy, right? So we can get our grants reviewed before we even send them in. So yeah, there's definitely the training is where we see a lot of people like light up, get, like you said, that is definitely, it's a great thing. If you're looking at your budget, you might not be able to hire a full-on grant writer, but to give somebody and to bring them on and to say, this is your dedicated role and we're going to give you the training and the support. Wow, you're going to get people. You probably will have to do like applications for that because you're going to get people lined up. Like they're so interested in that. Yeah.
So let's say for some reason or another, you choose not to go internal, you rather go external. And I imagine there's a few
Yeah.
considerations for why you would want to do that and some things you should be looking out for when looking for a grant writer or some benefits that external grant writers would have over internal ones. If you could speak a bit about those kinds of people.
Yeah. Yeah. So good. So there is. Okay. So if you're like, Holly, but I want to hire a full-time grant writer or have somebody in my role take on that, or like, in the nonprofit take on that role. Here's the problem. Like even looking at a grant writer, looking at another role, what you have to do as staff and nonprofit directors, you guys are going to be like, resonating with this. Okay. So what you have to do with staff, obviously, is you have to pay taxes, part of their taxes. You have to pay workers' comp. You have to pay fringe benefits if you offer those. I know a lot of nonprofits don't necessarily offer a lot of fringe benefits in the United States, but outside of the United States and some great nonprofits, they do offer those. So that is one cost that you might not look at if you're just looking at salary cost. So say if you're saying, okay, I'm going to pay someone $50K to come in as a grant writer. But in addition, you have these other costs, right? You have the taxes, you have the fringe benefits. You also have just things like they have to have an office if they're an employee, right? They have to have a computer. You have to keep up with their tech. Like all of those things are pretty pricey that you don't think about in just that 50K, let's say, is an kind of estimated price here. But the other thing I think that's even bigger, that's not a direct cost, it's an indirect cost, is managing somebody. Managing somebody is a huge cost, right? Because it's your time. You have to constantly think about, okay, if you hire a grant writer as an executive director, you're still doing a lot of strategy. I'm just going to say that even if you hired them to do strategy, you're still doing strategy because you're hiring somebody. It's just an interesting thing. There's still a hierarchy, all of that. Like you're still going to be looking at them going, what are they doing? Are they doing that right? Why aren't they doing this? You're still doing a lot of managing. The other thing is you are having to pay for their training as well. So you're still paying for training and any other deliverables, right? So they're also maybe going to those staff meetings. They might be helping with the fundraising. They might be doing a little other things outside of what they're actually supposed to do because they're an employee and you're going to tap into that. That could be a benefit too, but it's going to take them away from the direct ROI that you're actually hiring them to do, which is to write grants and to be a strategist, right? So there are a lot of embedded cost inside hiring somebody internally. Some of the pros, though, for that are they are more a part of your culture and your organization potentially, right? You're able to maybe leverage them in different ways. You might feel like there's more loyalty, quote unquote, but people quit too. People quit. People get fired. Like, I don't know. I feel like we feel like there's more loyalty as an employee, but I don't really believe that's the case, right? I really don't because here's the other part of that. Let me put my other hat on, like the devil's advocate or play on that role is to say that a consultant, you're their client when you're a nonprofit. They want to keep you as a client. So it's a little bit of a different, kind of aim. So those would be some like pros and cons to internal staff member as a grant writer. If you're looking to hire a freelance grant writer, grant professional, external, some of the major things are, at face value, maybe their monthly rate might look a little bit different or their hourly rate. But usually consultants who are a little bit more mature offer retainers. And if you looked at that, you'd probably still be paying less than a staff member with all those other costs, right? So if you look at that, you're like, okay, and they're only going to work on strategy writing, like all of the 5 things that I said. They're not going to be going to that other staff meeting. They're not going to be doing that other thing that you have to tap them for that helps with your nonprofit. They're just doing the main strategy that's going to focus on getting grants. That's where their brain's going to be. That's what they do all day long. That's what they do with their other clients. So they're also staying on the edge. So something they do for somebody else, they might be like, okay, I know this is a good grant for you. They're getting a lot of experience because that's what they do. They're able to tune into the world and be, really keep at the cutting edge of everything that's going on in grants because that's everything they do with their clients. So you see a role of professionalism with that as well, where they actually start to manage you, which is nice as an executive director to be able to have somebody schedule a meeting for you and then you show up and they say, okay, here's what's going on with everything, all the grants that we've submitted. Here's all the things. Here are my questions for you. And it's like in and out and you're like, thank you. Right. So there's such a different relationship with somebody who is a consultant versus a staff member, and even how you listen to them and how they're staying on top of everything. So it is a different type of relationship. And like I said, sometimes it's actually less expensive to hire a consultant because that's all they're focused on. And if they're a mature consultant, they are billing you usually at a set rate every single month for a certain deliverable, right? For deliverables throughout that time. So yeah, there's a lot of we could look at it either way. And I think it also depends where your nonprofit's at, right? If you're just starting out, you might not be at that point, so you need to leverage the board member or whatever and pay for some training. But once you start going, you want someone dedicated who's not just purely a volunteer who you kind of have to be like, oh, please write this. And they're like, yeah, I'm going on vacation next week. Can't do that grant, right? You need a different level of support at that time. So you would want to be thinking about potentially hiring somebody internally or external, depending on your needs.
I heard you say pros and cons for internal, but only the pros for external.
Oh, yeah.
And just for the
There's
sake
a lot
of balance,
pros for external.
I get it. And as an consultant, I'm a consultant myself, so I get all of it. I mean, it's very similar themes, regardless if it's Salesforce consulting for nonprofits or for grant writing. But just to balance the scales, could you mention maybe a couple of cons of hiring a freelance?
Yeah. Sure. I mean, some cons could be maybe they are more expensive, right, than just paying for training and having a volunteer, right? So there is budget. Sometimes, that would be the major thing to look at, budgets. Sometimes it is just you internally saying a lack of trust. Can they actually do this? They're not in my organization. Like I mentioned that loyalty before. Are they going to be loyal to me? Can we really depend that they're doing the work? And I would say from that perspective, that's more of a mindset issue than it is an actual factual con, right? To kind of play that up. But it could be more in your mind and more in your past experience working with consultants than an actual truth. But that does play a role in that con. Okay, now I've got to have invite somebody else in. I feel like maybe I have to manage that consultant. Maybe they aren't as mature, so you are doing more of the management, right? So I would also say part of the con could be taking time to actually find a good fit consultant, right? And knowing how to do that, knowing what questions to ask and knowing what you should be expecting. Because that is a bit of a skill to know, right? As an executive director. And that's part of what you should be doing too, to be leading your team, is to be understanding how to hire people, how to know who's a good fit, all of those things, knowing what kind of questions to ask. But that is a skill that's learned. You can't just expect to know how to do those types of things. Yeah. Is that helpful, Alex?
Yes, thank you. And I just wanted to make sure that we see the full picture as best as we can to be not too biased.
Yeah.
So I wanted to shift perspectives then now from the nonprofit to the actual grant writer themselves. So let's pretend this is an individual that writes grants professionally. And I was wondering from their perspective, because you've seen people who are full-time grant writers at nonprofits shift to freelance, or freelancers, I don't know if they shift back to full-time. I imagine that happens sometimes. And I was wondering, giving advice to them, what would be some reasons why they would prefer having that full-time employment versus a freelance? And then you mentioned loyalty a couple of times, and I do agree that loyalty is not necessarily intrinsic when just because you're full-time employees, because some people will just take as much training as I can from an organization and head off as quickly as I can. And you're right, certain consultants might want to stick around for as long as possible because it's a working, beneficial relationship for them. So there are pros and cons for the loyalty part. But I was wondering if there's other elements, factors, considerations for people who are grant writers to be a full-time or to be a freelancer.
Yeah, yeah. And I love how you're turning it from like, what is a nonprofit perspective? And then now what is the individual's perspective, right? So, because that's different. That's different. So a lot of people, what we've seen inside the program too is very interesting. And it depends what your goals are. I would say like, it definitely is hands down. It depends on your situation, what you want. There isn't a blanket one fit all. Like we're all different and unique and have our own desires, right? Of what we want or what we feel like we need, right? So we have some people that come into the program and they say, you know what? Love learning about grants. Now I'm going to be able to go and I got a promotion. So we've seen that happen. Like I'm going to stay in my job, but now I got a promotion. And that's amazing, right? Because now they have the skills of writing grants. They were able to secure some grants and they move up. So they use it as an ability to move up and say, I'm really going to learn this skill so I can kind of like move laterally or up and down, right? And vertically in my position. Other people will come in and they'll say, I want to quit my job in 6 months. Like, how do I do that? You know, I want out of this. I want more flexibility, and reasons for that are maybe flexibility in schedule. We see people who, you know, they're having little babies, little kids. They want to be home more. So they want that, or they're taking care of aging loved ones and they need more, or they have health concerns or their partners do. And they say, you know, the traditional 9 to 5 isn't working for me. It's not working for my situation. So they're looking at ways, and we have like how to quit your job, right? Like an actual strategy. And what we even do there is a lot of times what people will do, Alex, is really cool, is we also teach them specifically if they're working at a nonprofit, how to transition that full-time JOB into their first anchor client. So we see a lot of that too, because maybe it is a good working relationship, but they're just like, because of my life situation and because of my desires and dreams, maybe, right? I want to shift out of that, but it's not like totally toxic. It's not like whatever. It's just like, we need to have a different relationship. And that nonprofit's like, we don't want to lose you either. So we would definitely like to keep you in this capacity because you have all the institutional knowledge. You have all of the things, our nonprofit. We have that relationship with you already. And we can see that this would work better in your situation, that you could just focus on that. So it's actually a win-win. We see a lot of that happening as far as people transitioning out, but keeping their full-times as anchor clients, which is fantastic. And then they have some cash flow set up. They already know that client, all the things. So it's a really nice transition. We see that happen, I would say, a lot. And then we see people who are like, no, I just want to be full-time. I just want to be out there as a freelance grant writer. That's what I want to do. Maybe I want to scale up a business. It's not about like working less hours. I actually want to scale up. I want to break some glass ceilings. I want to get some retirement in. Like I want to do some good in the world and help all these causes and maybe even hire a team, right? So we also see that level. So once again, all of these things go back. It's not really like, oh, here's the pros and cons for each one. It's more about who are you and what is your life situation and what are your life goals? Because anything can work for you, right? Some people are like, yeah, I've been freelancing, but you know what? Maybe I'll go back to a job. And guess what? I got hired for more because I have all this experience now, but I'll just keep a side client because maybe I want that health insurance or, I'm just whatever. So there's different things, although you can get health insurance as a freelancer. Don't freak out, y'all. So, so there is more of it's based on what is your specific situation and desire and goals and dreams of how you want to live, because we are in a time right now where we actually have a lot of those choices, especially in the West, right? I know there's a lot of countries where you do not have that access yet to make those kinds of decisions. But going more into this virtual world, a lot of people are able to say, okay, even if I got some training, I could run a business from anywhere, right? And really thinking about it, we have clients from all over the world, which is amazing. So this knowledge industry and being able to know how to make a sale and get a client just out of a skill skill and out of a computer and internet connection is one of the easiest to step into and to keep long-term something on the side, because we never know what's going to happen with a full-time, right? Even like our spicy belief is even if you have a full-time job, you should have a side grant writing business, because you never know what's going to happen. We've seen too many people get fired at the last minute, especially in a nonprofit. A grant stopped getting funding. So funders didn't, fund as much for end of year funding. Like your job just got cut and no severance pay, no nothing. So there is some security in just being able to start something, and literally with a computer, some skills and internet connection, you can do it. And this is a job we know that is going to be competitive for all of our lifetime right now, right? You know what I mean? That I can see in the future, like it's going to be around. So yeah, sorry, I went kind of like sideways on that a lot, but going back to it really depends on who you are and what you want to do, right? And what your goals are, what your situation is.
Yeah. There are a lot of similarities between what you're saying about grant writers and Salesforce consultants, which is really interesting to see that these are two worlds that are not necessarily connected, and yet a lot of similarities. I was hoping you could drill a little bit further on that full-time to freelance perspective, because that's also something that's very common. A lot of full-time Salesforce consultants ask me how to become a independent consultant or a freelance consultant. And I have a similar kind of advice where you shouldn't just, sell everything, quit everything, and then announce to the world, okay, I'm freelance today. To your point, having that anchor client, having something to start with will make your life a lot easier. It'll reduce your stress. You should definitely have at least 6 months of living expenses in the bank account as well. And I was wondering if, is there anything more that you would add to that, or whether you say that's sufficient to be able to say, all right, maybe you might want to consider going, also the fact that you want that lifestyle, all those benefits, it does fit, you believe it fits at least with your lifestyle that you're trying to achieve and the freedom you're trying to have. Like, would you add any more to considerations or thoughts when moving from full-time to freelance?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So I got a good one. And all of your points you made, yeah, like 100%, 100%. But we have another thought, and this is really, really good. And it's a little bit like outside the norm, but here it is. What you want to do today is start thinking of your JOB as your client in your brain. Even if they're not, even if you haven't had that conversation, Holly, that's not a conversation I'm going to have for 6 months. Good. Show up today, start thinking of them as your client. What would my client need today? Even start calling them that in your brain, right? Just even repositioning your thoughts around that is actually huge, because what y'all going to do, from this thought is to say, what was my job description of what they actually hired me to do? Because chances are you're not doing everything on that job description. You're doing other things as well, and all the things, right? So they hired me to do these things because they wanted an ROI, like a return on investment in something. Even in nonprofits, I'm not just talking about for-profits, y'all. They hired you to do something specific to lead the impact of the nonprofit in some way. It doesn't have to be a financial ROI, right? Or maybe it is. So am I doing that? Because all of a sudden you're probably doing 10 other things that got thrown on you, right? That aren't actually leading to that ROI. Or you're just not doing a really good job of it. That's not really where you shine. So I would also say, from the perspective of this is a client, it's not a JOB, this is my client. How do I actually start giving them better deliverables and better ROIs? I would list down everything that you are doing, track all of your time for what you're doing, each task, and then say, hey, is this a 1, 2, or 3? The 3 would be it's leading the most ROI. It's awesome. I'm good at it. All the things. A 2's kind of like, man. A 1's like, this is so inefficient. I don't even know why I'm doing it. Right? And really just start there. There's other things you can do from there. But if you just bring it to the table to say, am I actually showing up to get a result, instead of just like, am I clocking in, clocking out and getting the busy work done? No. Start really thinking about, this is a client and they want a deliverable. How can I show up and what am I actually doing to get there? Just that alone is going to help you like so much when you actually then have that discussion. You're going to have data to have that discussion as well, because you're going to be tracking things now, y'all. And you're going to start thinking about, okay, this is actually how I might put together a service, because someone's going to come to you. Hey, can you just find 10 grant prospects for me, or whatever that is, right? Maybe I could just take on this one little job on the side, right? Like, to your point, you don't have to just quit your job with no experience, no clients, and then go full on, you can take on a couple here and there, try it out, see what's going on while you have the financial assurance of your full-time job, right? That's going to ease your nervous system as well. And it can also help you get to that 6 months in savings a lot quicker if you take on side jobs here and there. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that perspective actually of the mindset, because I think that's one of the biggest shifts from full-time to freelance is the mindset. I've been freelance now for 20 something years. So I've forgotten that. But the idea is certainly that is when you see, or if you see, or if you take the perspective of your current employer as your client, I think it's a fantastic way to start preparing yourself mentally for that change in mindset. So thank you.
Yeah.
I really appreciate that. You mentioned also future stuff. So, foreseeable future. I was wondering if you could talk a bit about if you had a crystal ball, or from what you see from your perspective on your crystal ball that you have, I'm sure somewhere, what kind of trends do you see happening in the future? Like, where do you see AI in grant writing or any other technologies, or any kind of trends that you anticipate or expect to happen in the next, say 2 to 5 years?
Yeah. And I kind of have a crystal ball since I do live in the future. I'm based in Guam, y'all. So I'm like 14 hours ahead of Alex right now. So but what I see happening and embrace it fully I embrace it fully, but I'm very cautious as well, right? And I'm kind of like seeing how this all rolls out. But what I'm doing is I'm going with partners who understand this better than me. So I've actually partnered with somebody for AI, to your point, because a lot of people are like, won't AI take away grant writing jobs? And if you heard everything I said today, I hope you're like, oh, no, it won't, because they don't just do the grant writing. They do all these other things that actually take strategy and thought and all of that. Who knows eventually if AI ever gets that smart, I'm sure it will. But, at this point in time, then we'll just keep evolving our role as well. We'll always need to be evolving as humans on how to teach AI, like it's whatever. But I have partnered with Grantable, which is AI software for grant writing, because that's their jam. That's what they do. They focus on that 100%. So what we do, and they have very aligned philosophies as we do, as far as we have inside of the Freelance Grant Writer Academy, is we have our 30-day master grant template framework. So we help you actually develop a grant template. It's about 28 pages. It is amazing. And it's one of the first things you might want to do, that we recommend you do with your clients. And what this helps is it helps them not mission drift and just chase money because there's dollar bills and we'll do that and we'll develop a project for that, right? It helps them, like I mentioned in the beginning, like know what their mission is, know what their priority is, really understand the gaps and the needs and put some data behind it. And then you go look for grants. And then you can write grants off of something you've already identified your budget, you've identified all of your needs with it, et cetera. So Grantable is the same way. They're like, don't just use AI before you have any kind of human work done in your grants. So what we've realized is that our 30-day master grant template framework actually fits lovely when you put it into their AI software, and will save you a lot of time because you've done the thought process and the work to actually build out something. So instead of pulling random things from the internet, you're pulling it from your own work. And then you can say, hey, here's a new funding opportunity announcement. Here's the grant instructions, drop that in, use your application to pull it from. So we are embracing it in ways that actually make sense though, because if you don't, and even still, you need to review it, right? Because what happens is AI is really good on writing, kind of, right? It's not good on research. If you said right now, anyways, we're recording this in 2024. Who knows what it's going to be like in a year? But if you said for grant writers, they need like 10 sources and citations of the needs and the data, it'll give you 10 beautiful things. But guess what? They're called hallucinating. I don't know. They're called something about hallucinating.
Hallucinations. Yeah.
Yes. And what it is it's not real. It looks like it's real. You click on that URL and you go there and it's never existed. So they make it like, yes, we could do this. But chances are right now that's what's happening, right? So you can't don't rely on it for research in that way. You've got to use it a different way. But as far as the grant writing, what will happen as well is if you don't have it to pull something from you've actually done the thought work and putting it together of like what objectives, outcomes, et cetera, then it's just going to answer the questions very well, but it's just going to be like word vomit. So it's going to say like, okay, so I've asked a question like, please write out your concise need statement that has 10 sources that back up the need or whatever. It'll give 10 sources that don't do anything, and then it'll say we respond to this very well and we use this but it's just kind of repeating the question in several sentences without action. And reviewers, because I've been a grant reviewer for more than 10 years, we're going to catch that. We're going to be like, AI. We're going to be like, you don't get points for this, because we know we need to have an example from the program itself, et cetera, or whatever, right? So I would say don't rely exclusively, be very cautious with using grant writing or AI with your grant writing still. And you need to know how to write a grant. You just can't go in using AI without actually knowing strategy and how to develop it. And from that, human strategy is still needed to this day. Of course, there's other systems, but I would say that's the main tech question that comes up. We also like to use grant software for prospecting. So there's a lot of grant prospect software out there. There is some grant management software that's very helpful. Grant Easy Management software is a great one. So there are things that we recommend in using as far as like maybe some softwares to help you with grant prospecting or managing all of your grants. But we do say, you don't want to invest in all of that up front. You first want to get some clients. You can start with things at a lower lift and then invest in those later.
Awesome. Holly, this is fantastic. A lot of great information here. Obviously, we just scratched the surface, and you mentioned either a podcast or a newsletter or a webinar or a training or a course, but I want you to make sure you have the opportunity to mention those, because they are upcoming in the near future, plus ways to contact you online.
Yes, I love that. And anyone can go to grantwritingandfunding.com. That's our website. And we do have we have a webinar coming up next week, October 15th. So that's at 4 p.m. Eastern. And it is going to be great. It's how to create a profitable grant writing business with little to no experience. And that could be little to no grant writing experience, and it could be little to no business experience, because we get a lot of people that come that said, hey, I've been writing grants for 20 years, but I want to start a business, and I realize that I don't have business acumen skills. So we were going to talk about all of that. And I'm going to be teaching. It isn't just like you're going to show up and I'm going to pitch. Like, yeah, we'll talk about our program because it's opening right after that. But I teach my face off in those. So you guys will want to come. You're going to get so many gold gems out of that. You can go to the website, grantwritingandfunding.com /academy-webinar for that, or just go to the show notes that you have today, Alex. I'm sure you'll be dropping them in there. And we also have our Freelance Grant Writer Academy. So that's our 12-month group coaching program. And that is to help you replace your full-time income on flexible hours writing grants from home. So we do that in 12 months. As I mentioned, we have like unlimited grant reviews. We have business reviews. We teach you how to do sales. We teach you how to get your business set up, and just to really serve the nonprofits that you want to serve, right? The cause areas that you're passionate about. We get a lot of people coming too that are retiring from the nonprofit industry, which is cool. They've been EDs, they've been doing development, and they're like, I want to retire, but I don't want to work full time, but I want to consult. Like that's what everyone's retirement dream is. I'll become a consultant. Right? And then they get there and they're like, I don't know what to do. It's very overwhelming. Even if they're like, I have a friend, oh my gosh, she was, heading the sales manager for Xerox for like 20 years in this whole Western Pacific region. Now she's like, when she went into consulting, when she retired, of course, because I'll be a consultant when I retire, because I've been like, the main lead to do this for so many years. I have all these connections. And she was like, I don't know what to do. Like, it's such a different world, as you know, Alex, going into freelancing. So we definitely will help you there. We don't want you to feel lost. We want you to feel like I got it together. I can start getting clients, like all the things. So yeah, so come on October 15th. You guys are going to learn more. You're going to walk away with some great gems. We'd love to see you there.
I'll definitely put those links in the show notes. So thank you so much, Holly. Thank you for everything that you do. And it's been wonderful listening to you today.
Yeah, thank you one more thing. Y'all are podcast listeners. We have a podcast too. So that might be your easiest way to come over to us. And it's grant writing and funding. We keep it basic, y'all. It's grant writing and funding. So tune in. We would love to hear you guys over there, or have you guys as listeners over there. If this is how you like to get your content. So yeah, thanks so much, Alex, for having me on. This has been so much fun. Appreciate it.
The pleasure is mine. All right, that's it for today. I'm Alexander Lapa, and I hope you join me again in the next Agents of Nonprofit.